I got the okay that we're ready to go. Very good.
All right.
All right, in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Sports Beat KC, a sports podcast presented by the Kansas City Star. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. On today's show, Lynn Worthy stops by. We talk Royals. It's been a tough start for the Royals, 9-20 heading into a second game against the Tampa Bay Rays. But there have been some good things happen to the Royals, especially in the lineup. Later, Vahe Gregorian and I discuss Jamaal Charles, who is retiring from pro football. He's going to sign a one-day contract with the Chiefs so he can retire as a member of the organization that drafted him. This conversation with Lynn Worthy was recorded on Tuesday before the Royals game was rained out and rescheduled as a doubleheader Wednesday. By the time you hear this, who knows? Maybe the Royals will have gotten out the brooms and swept the doubleheader. I am here with Royals beat writer Lynn Worthy. We're going to talk about the Royals who, had it going a little bit after the rough start. Had won 5 out of 7 and had swept the Indians, had beaten the Yankees in the opening series in New York, but things haven't been going well for the Royals, who take a 9-20 record into their next game against the Tampa Bay Rays that, as of the time, Lynn, that you and I talk about this, has not been postponed, but there's a lot of rain here in Kansas City. Might not see this one played. But, hey, how you doing, Lynn?
I'm doing good, getting myself prepared for some good tarp watching. And and maybe some baseball somewhere in the next couple of days. We'll see. Who knows?
I don't think it's generally known outside of the baseball press boxes or the baseball circles that a postponed game is there's a certain verb that's used when a game is postponed. We don't call it that. We call it banged. The game's been banged. So we think that might happen today, huh?
Yeah. That's and sometimes I say it. I think I even typed it on our inner office message system, and after I did, I thought, I was like, should I not have used that term? Because it's just covering the minors. It was always a term that was used. I remember one time actually, just a brief little tangent here. It was in covering AA in Binghamton, New York, and they announced after a delay that they had postponed the game. They announced a new date and everything. And once they have a delay, they don't make you wait to go into the clubhouse. So they announced it. I put it on Twitter. I go down to the clubhouse, and something was weird because guys were still in uniform, still sitting at their tables playing cards and things like that. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, what's going on? And somebody looks at me and goes, wait a minute, did they bang the game? And I was like, as far as I know, they did. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Maybe y'all should talk to the manager. And they said, no. You're already in here. You put it on Twitter. One of them looked at their phone and said, you put it on the Twitter. And then they said, yeah, Lynn banged the game. We all go home. And I was like the manager just hadn't come in to the clubhouse yet for some reason. And so we all knew and never announced it in the stadium. But the guys were still sitting there in the clubhouse and sort of looking at me sideways because I was just scrolling through. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So, but yeah, one of the guys announced for everybody, Lynn banged the game. It's on Twitter. Let's go.
You have that power. With the power of the beat writer. Well, I know the Royals. You don't want this because that stacks up. If it is a postponement, and it might be, if not today, tomorrow. The rain's supposed to be here for a while. That kind of stacks up the pitching and limits availability in the bullpen. But that'll we'll see if that happens. Let's go back to last night's game. It's to the point for me, Lynn, when Brad Keller takes the mound, I think Royals have a pretty good chance in this game, and not the case yesterday. Rays got up 4-0, I think, in that one. So it's been a couple of rough outings for Keller, 2 of his last 3. What's different about him different than what we saw in the first couple of starts for him?
Well, this one just this last evening. I don't know if it was the extra days off that he had because he had served suspension, plus the team had a day off, so there was a couple extra days. So it's been about a solid week since his last start. And he just looked off in terms of just, wasn't able to throw it where he wanted to, was just sort of yanking pitches this way and that way. He was able to still get him through 5. And I think so he gave up 3 in the first 2 innings and still got him through 5. And, not what you're looking for, but at least gave you a chance to still be in the game. I think when he left the game, it was I want to say it was 5-3 when he left the game, so they were still there. But that one was just one of those nights where he couldn't command where the ball was going. The outing before that, which was actually also against Tampa Bay, he was actually looking really good through 6, and then he tried to come back for the 7th, and they wanted to get him through 7, and he ended up giving up, I think, another 3 runs, or I'm not looking at it right now, but it was either 3 or 4 runs. So up until that point, when he had a quality start, had only given up 2 runs and was thinking out into the 7th inning. So that one, it was sort of, it was the finish as opposed to the overall outing that sort of got him in that one. And I think part of it there was also the bullpen has been inconsistent. So Ned Yost and the staff sort of leaned on Keller because, as good as he's proven himself to be, even, still at this early stage, and he's, pretty much been deemed their ace, the workhorse. They'd rather lean on him than a bullpen that's been up and down. So they tried to get a little more length out of him, and that one just sort of backfired on him in that outing. So, I don't think it's been anything that, should be too concerning. I think it's just sort of the ups and downs of the baseball season. I wouldn't, put too much panic in anybody about the last couple of bumpy starts.
I was going to make fun of the term inconsistent when you describe the bullpen, but that's actually true. They're after a terrible start for the bullpen, they kind of righted the ship for a couple of weeks. Had a stretch. I think they had maybe 8 or 9 consecutive scoreless innings, but it reared its ugly head again last night. So where are we with this bullpen? It's been sort of the season-long theme for the Royals, and probably gets if you had a pie graph of Royals problems, it probably has the biggest slice of the pie. But what do you make of the bullpen? And I will say this: the Royals still lead baseball in blown saves. They've only in 12 save opportunities, they've only saved 4. So they got that going for them. Where are we with the bullpen?
I think it's going to be a work in progress for probably the first. I could see it being a work in progress for the first half of the season, just because of the fact that you've got new people in there. It's almost it's not, well, I was going to say it's almost a whole new group, but you still have Peralta, you still have Hill, McCarthy is back down the minors. Well, actually, Hill's back in the minors again too now. But so those guys were holdovers. But the problem at the beginning of the season was those guys were as inconsistent as the new guys. A guy like Kennedy has actually been pretty solid. A guy who hasn't pitched in the bullpen in 10 years since until this the start of this season. And then you got some young guys. You had Zimmer up here early in the season, hadn't ever been in the big leagues, and he had some struggles. Lovelady is now up here for the first time, and he's still working through just, getting used to pitching on a regular basis, because he's, even in the minors, talking to him yesterday, he was saying, yeah, usually, you could count on a certain number of days off after you pitched unless something weird happened. Whereas here, the biggest adjustment he felt like he had to make was just being ready mentally and physically to pitch every day if needed, which, he didn't have that in the minors. So he's still adjusting to that. Scott Barlow was a guy who had been pretty much a starter, and now they're making him a relief guy. So there's just a lot of moving parts, and guys who aren't used to doing this on a regular basis. All signs point that they got some ability to do it, but while you're figuring it out, and while there's a bunch of you figuring it out at the same time, it can be rough. And then you got some guys who have been, proven in the past, but have just been had some ups and downs. Boxberger has looked really good his last 3 innings, but before that, there was folks ready to run him on out of town.
Sure.
Diekman had some outings early on where he had hit some bumps in the road, and then he's had some good outings. And then, last night, one pitch that is higher than he wants it to gives up turns into a run because it's an RBI single. And so, but some of that is just, life in the bullpen. So, but until they get things, guys who have track record, pitch into that track record, and young guys with no track record get their feet under them, I think it's just going to continue to sort of be a little up and down until they can sort of get that sorted out.
And Royals fans got so spoiled in their rise to the World Championship of 2015 because the The bullpen was lights out. It was automatic. The Royals had a lead, and they took a lead after 6, and that game was over. It didn't matter when you had Kelvin Herrera, Wade Davis, and Greg Holland, or some combination of those three in 2015 as well. It was lights out. It was over, and now I watch the Royals, and the starter comes out. You look in the bullpen and you wonder, who do you trust right now? Who's the most trustworthy of the relievers? And I'm not sure there is one that you feel totally confident, right? Maybe Kennedy, just because I don't have the ERAs in front of me or the stats in front of me, but he seems to be as consistent as anybody in the pen right now. Do you think that's is that a fair observation? It's just whose trust is just kind of day to day with the Royals bullpen.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's probably the most frustrating or the hardest part is just that it's who you trust changes from day to day, and it might not last but so long. So I mean, a guy like Kennedy has looked really good, and he's starting. I mean, he's gotten to the point where he's a guy who's trusted. Peralta, based off of what he did last year and this year, is still kind of a trusted guy, but he's had some outings that make you shake your head a little bit. And even when he closed out games, he would. It wouldn't be a comfortable closeout. It would be, a couple guys on base, and you get down to the final strike, and so. But I think they're sort of come to the conclusion that that's what he's going to be as far as closing out games. Like you just have to ride through some of that. But he's also had some almost. I mean, like I think to that game in Detroit where that was during that stretch where nobody was really getting it done out of the bullpen, and he got down to I think it was bases loaded, and he was a strike away from getting out of it, no runs scored, and escaping a big jam. But then with 2 strikes, he gave up what ended up being a grand slam that completely turned the game and turns into a loss. So, but Kennedy and Peralta are probably the guys right now who you can somewhat trust on a regular basis. And then after that, it's, you got to play it by ear, which is a tough way to manage a bullpen, for any manager.
Yeah. And look, when it comes to the lineup, I thought going into the season, I wasn't sure who I was going to trust in the 3, 4, 5 hole. And as it turns out, the Royals are getting a lot of production from that part of their lineup with Gordon and Soler and Dozier. I don't know if All-Star worthy is accurate, but look, that part of the lineup is producing for the Royals. You had a nice story earlier this season on Alex Gordon. Let's touch on him just for a second. What's been a couple of the keys for him to get this thing turned around after a couple of just miserable seasons?
Well, funny enough, because the last couple of years, injuries have been some of the things that sort of held him back. But also talking to him, injury may have been the thing that sort of helped him get out of the bad habits and the things that were holding him back as well. Because he said it during spring training, but he also said it to me a couple of weeks ago. I was getting ready to write the story about the time he was on the disabled list was really the time that helped him by not playing every day. Make some changes to his batting stance, become more upright. And Dale Swaim, the bench coach, been talking to him about, listen, you need to get back to the way you were, because Swaim was the hitting coach in 14 through 17, but during that time he also studied what Gordon looked like earlier in his career, so he was very familiar with him. Basically his whole major league career as a hitter, and he'd seen him become more crouched down, and it was causing problems as far as being able to get to certain pitches. It was taking away the power and leverage that he had in his swing. It was just debilitating him as a hitter, not because of age, which is the first thing people would point to because he's now in age 35 season, but it was just the fact that his stance and his ability to get to certain pitches and sort of tying up his hands as opposed to being a free, easy swing was really just turned him into basically a shell of the hitter that he had been at times during his career. So that stretch where he was injured on now the injured list, not the disabled list,
Right.
really, it helped him to be able to take a step back and to make those changes. Because you hear guys, whether it's hitters or pitchers, both say, while you're playing games, trying to get outs and competing, it's hard to sort of make these mechanical changes and make them consistently and make them stick. The DL helped him be able to do that. He really saw the progress at the end of last season. They put him into the 3-hole in the lineup behind, Whit Merrifield and Adalberto Mondesi. Those guys on base have really, they've been getting on base consistently, obviously draw attention because of their speed and base stealing ability. And Gordon also said that he felt like it makes him a more aggressive hitter batting in that spot. And, I think at the end of last season, the last 21 games he batted there, and his numbers were significantly better. He carried it over into spring training. Same thing. He's been in 3-hole this year. He didn't have a hit in the first couple of games, but he was getting on base, and he's just sort of continued that. He was, besides Dozier, who's, one of the hottest hitters in the American League right now, or in the major leagues right now. Besides him, Gordon's been, for the best hitter in this lineup this season. And the other thing that he mentioned too, he mentioned during spring training, was he's changed some of his workout habits, because he's, he was legendary as far as just the weights and just the way he took care of his body, and he still takes care of his body. He's realized as he's gotten older that you can't, throw around those weights and go crazy and then go play the ball game and still be able to recover the next day and do it over and over again. So he's backed off of the weights in favor of more body weight stuff and stretching and bands and all that sort of stuff. So that's helped him be able to recover and be at his best every day as well.
It's been one of the really positive developments for the Royals this year as April comes to a close. So just a good first month and a week for Alex Gordon. The Royals look to get back on the winning ways. We'll save Hunter Dozier conversation for next time. Lynn Worthy, I really appreciate you joining us today, and stay dry at the ballpark.
Thanks. I'll try.
Hey, it's Blair Kerkhoff, and if you're listening to this, you love Kansas City sports, whether it's the Chiefs, Royals, Sporting, Mizzou, KU, or K-State. And no one covers these teams like the Kansas City Star. If you currently subscribe to the paper or have a digital subscription, thank you for your support. And if you don't, here's a great offer. It's called Sports Pass, unlimited digital access to every sports story and video on kansascity.com. And it's just $30 for the first year. It's the best sports value in town, just 8 cents a day or $2.50 a month. You can't beat that. Subscribe now at kansascity.com/sportspass. Vahe Gregorian joins me on the occasion of Jamaal Charles. I don't know if he announced the retirement, but word got out that he is retiring as a Chief. He's going to sign a one-day contract with the Chiefs this week to retire as a member of the Kansas City Chiefs, which is somewhat not common, but it happens in sports. We've seen it in other places. So Vahe and I we're going to talk a little bit about what we remember mostly about Jamaal Charles. I think for both of us, our first memories of him are a great running back at Texas. But, you got to the Kansas City Star, Vahe, in 2013, and that was Andy Reid's first year in town. And I just remember a couple of games where Jamaal went nuts, like the game in Oakland.
Yes.
The 4 touchdown receptions and almost 200 yards receiving.
I think all on screens.
Yeah, the screen passes
yeah.
where he just and in some cases there wasn't a Raider in the picture.
But there were Raider fans in the picture by the end throwing beer on him.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he just stood there kind of opening his arms up to it. I remember that.
So even though you may not have seen his best rushing years, because he had a couple the year before you got here in 2012, he rushed for over 1,500 yards, and he had a 1,400-yard season earlier in his career. You saw some pretty good Jamaal Charles.
I did, and I'll tell you, if I remember this right, too, this was that same season. They started 9-0, and almost every game the formula was get through 3 quarters, then the fourth quarter is Jamaal's, whether it mostly running but also passing. And as you noted, that Oakland game, Blair, that was as good a game as you'll ever see anybody have. And what I was really struck by all along watching him, he sort of led with his heart on everything he did, and you could feel that in how hard he played, and he was a very complete football player. He was a good blocker too. In some ways, the guy that I had seen before that reminded me of him, that I'd seen up close a little bit, was Marshall Faulk of the Rams.
Right.
Complete football player, and in a lot of ways one of the best football players that I ever saw. And I have Jamaal in that category in my head. Certainly among the best, and quite a guy too.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second. One thing that I really remember about Jamaal Charles was his ability to find a seam or a hole and go 80 or 90 yards. I mean, he had, I looked this up as I was writing the story about him today. He had 5 touchdowns in his career of 76 rushing touchdowns of 76 yards or longer. That's remarkable. He had, I can remember I think it was the 2012 season where at one point late in the season, he had more touchdown runs of 80 yards or longer than of 5 yards or shorter. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was a combination of him being really good and the Chiefs being horrible, but it was a crazy stat. But I think you had an appreciation of Jamaal for reasons other than his football ability.
A little bit because of, and we could talk about that now or a little bit later, but because of a trip to Port Arthur. But I remember having that feeling about him, and look, part of that feeling was a worry about how hard he played, how often he got hurt, what's going to become of him as we learn more and more about CTE, about concussions he sustained. Remember that game where he hid from the trainer?
Yeah.
So he didn't have to answer a question about the concussion protocol?
That's right. No, that's right.
And if I remember right, I think this is true, Blair, that Colts game, the playoff game, he got a concussion.
He did.
And that takes me back to
and didn't finish the game.
And didn't finish the game.
In fact, that happened early.
It did happen, first half. But it makes me think a little bit about the little sad asterisk in his career that no playoff success. He maybe was on one, maybe it was in one winning playoff game.
No, not even one.
Not even one.
He was in that game, the Colts game. Then he was part of the Ravens game in 2010. So both losses. He had scored the Chiefs' only touchdown that game. It was like a 45-yard run against the Ravens. But then, as you said, he was out early against the Colts, and that was no playoff success for the teams that he was on. He really was offensively a one-man band until Andy Reid got and brought his offense to Kansas City.
Well, it's a shame, but to circle back to the point you were making, when I went to Port Arthur just to sort of learn about his life, it was really I really came across some sweet and kind of beautiful things. I mean, he was the kid. I was just looking up the story that they were doing a roast of him when I was down there. And he was the guy, one of his best friends would say then, you were the guy that nobody wanted around. And part of it was he had anxieties. He had a learning disability. He struggled to assert himself in any way in the classroom, kind of hid in the back and clung to all the females in his life and really got teased about it mercilessly in his family. And of all the weird things, it seems crazy now, but there are different aspects of this that Special Olympics brings into play. But Special Olympics was a big deal for him. It gave him confidence for the first time. And I should point out, because everybody hearing this would possibly think about, well, he's a world-class athlete, how could he be in that? But there was different categories for
right.
learning disabled.
Exactly. No, that's right.
And it was really the first time in his life that he thought anything of himself. And with that, as you know, might be guessed, there was certain momentum to his confidence, and he had that ability, and he did gain some just measure of self-reliance in the classroom, and had a really nice teacher in the class that helped him through. So there were a lot of things that fell right for him, even amid a lot of hardship. It's a poor town. No father in his life at the time, but strong mother and strong grandmother.
Played on the Texas National Championship team of 2005, the Vince Young-led Texas Longhorns, and then had a couple more seasons at Texas. Was the Chiefs' third-round pick in the 2008 draft. Played behind Larry Johnson until the Chiefs parted ways with Larry Johnson in 2009. And then he became the guy, and once he became the guy, he was tremendous. He really was. And I know a stat that you and I were batting around a little while ago was his yards per carry, which I think that speaks to someone's production as much as anything. Is how far do you go when you get the ball if you're a running back? And he went on an average as far as almost anybody who's ever played the game.
And I can't remember the final number, Blair. Was it 5.5
I think it's
or
5.4?
5.4. And that's, for context, a notch above Jim Brown, who it was thought to have that record for a long time. The confusing thing to me in this is whether Marion Motley was called a running back per se, but I guess he's the one who has the career
the all-time
career
record.
number. And of course, there are a couple quarterback categories, depending on how you break it down, that Randall Cunningham and Michael Vick's averages were there. But if you really look at just running backs in the history of the game, Jamaal Charles, by that definition, and I think it's a worthy one, is a top 5 running back.
No doubt. He's the Chiefs' career rushing leader. 70, I think it's 7260 was the number, final number. Over 7,500 in his career because he played with the Broncos in 2017, and then 2 games with the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. And there was some talk about him retiring after last year. Didn't come out and say it, but now it's as soon as he signs his name on the contract, it'll be official. I do know he told TMZ, he had an interview with TMZ a couple months ago. He thinks he should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I double checked with one of our good friends and former colleague, Randy Kovitz, about this. So we had a nice discussion. Randy knows more about Chiefs history and about the NFL and was a Hall of Fame voter for quite a long time. So this isn't just random, sports writer Randy Kovitz.
And just to elaborate on that point really quick, a Hall of Fame voter in the NFL is different than in other sports, or at least has its own unique niche, which is you're in the room making cases and deliberating.
You're one of 32 people who decide this. Randy thinks he falls short of the Pro Football Hall of Fame credentials. I want to take a closer look at it and just compare him. 7,500 yards for a running back would probably put him pretty close to the low end of running backs who were in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But that yards per carry, I mean, he's he was a burst of energy. Gale Sayers is someone else who had a very short career, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but also did some was a return specialist and a kind of a transcendent player as well. Also, no postseasons. I don't think Gale Sayers ever had a postseason appearance. So there is that. I'll get into that a little bit later this week. But anyway, you know what? To be honest with you, it was kind of tough to see Jamaal these last couple of years, and even his last year with the Chiefs. I can remember that injury against the Bears. We were at the ALDS in Houston when that game happened.
Right.
But following that game, we were just following the game, and it was just another tough injury for him that cost him most of the season.
I guess basically he never quite got it back after that, right?
I think that's right.
Never was really the same. Might have had a little burst, maybe a game, but nothing substantial or lasting. You're making me think still about the Hall of Fame question, and I am curious if Randy was looking at that production in total yards was one of the things he was thinking of. How much did Randy think that it matters to the committee about the playoff matter in the modern era, as opposed to being a transcendent player like Gale Sayers, who didn't? It's
a good point. We were talking about Terrell Davis for the Broncos, who didn't have an expansive career in terms of years played, but he was one of the great. He had 2 of the greatest postseasons of all time, helping the Broncos win a couple Super Bowls. So I think if you're maybe if your stats are a little bit below the average at that position, if you have something in your pocket like the postseason success, that would elevate you. So it's just a tough deal for Jamaal Charles to not only have come to the Chiefs at a time when there was coaching turnover and uncertainty, having played for Romeo Crennel and Todd Haley and then finally Andy Reid. But, his best years with the Chiefs were not with Andy Reid. Statistically, they just weren't. Andy Reid opened up the offense, got others involved, And I remember that being an issue. How is Andy Reid going to affect Jamaal Charles? And his rushing totals did go down, but his overall, he set a personal record and led the NFL in touchdowns in 2013, got into the end zone a lot. So he was fun to watch.
He was fun to watch. You're reminding me of one of those questions we might have seen on our exams in college about whether the times make the men or the men make the times, or and look, you could place him in a different atmosphere and maybe have a lot bigger numbers, right? Maybe so, and maybe have more wins in some postseason times. But the reality is you exist when you do and where you do, and that's how it went for him. I do see that there's more to examine on the Hall of Fame matter, but certainly he'll be a Chiefs Hall of Famer,
Ring of Honor guy for sure.
Right, for sure. And I for some reason it came into my mind earlier. I can't remember whether John Dorsey said this as they released Jamaal or in the run-up to releasing him, but he was one of those guys that he would always say he's a Chief, and I think that resonated and carries through now.
And that's exactly why he is signing a one-day contract with the Chiefs to retire as a Kansas City Chief. So hey, Vahe, thanks for stopping by and talking about this.
My pleasure, Blair.
Links to the stories we discuss can be found in the story notes and on kansascity.com. I want to thank our guests and Kathy Liu and Leah Becerra for putting this podcast together. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. Thanks for listening.